Odd Conduit Media.
The Sandman Unlocked.
Hello, dreamers, and welcome to another episode of The Sandman Unlocked. I'm one of your co-hosts, Ben, and I'm thrilled you're joining us for our breakdown of the Sandman Issue 7, Sound and Fury. I'm joined by my two adjective co-hosts, Ashley.
Hail and well met.
And Sean.
Out, brief candles. What's up, everybody?
On each episode, we'll be deconstructing the issue in 6 separate sections. First will be the rundown, where we will let you know who created the issue, and then the catch-up to be sure you know where we are in the story. Next, we'll do the breakdown, which gives you a synopsis of that week's issue, and then we follow up with the deep dive, where we really get into everything that happened. In our last 2 sections, we'll discuss our favorite panel and our non-Morpheus character.
So there you have it. 6 sections to get through, so let's get going. Sean, over to you for the rundown.
All right. I think this is my first week doing this. I think this is my first rundown. I'm very excited. All right. You got your writer. You got your Neil Gaiman, right? Number 1, top billing. You got your Mike Dringenberg and Malcolm Jones III on art. Mike doing pencils, Malcolm doing inks.
What is
you
this
got Daniel
accent you're adding?
That isn't too much.
Do not interrupt the rundown. It is most sacred.
I was too excited.
I feel like I'm supposed to be eating a gyro while you're saying this.
You've got Daniel Raja, colorist. We've got the inimitable Todd Klein on letters. Art Young is associate editor. And Karen Berger bringing it all together as editor. All right. Now, over to you, Ashley, for the catch-up. You can pick your accent of choice.
Oh, man, I was about to mock you, but now I gotta pick one.
Do the catch-up.
Hey, Sean, thanks, buddy. So we've just mercifully met, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, we've just mercifully survived the world's longest lunch date with John D. And after having brutally tortured and murdered 5 patrons and a writer, not a waitress, the reader sits in the silent tension that is finally broken by a fed-up dream. So that's where we're left off. Ben, on to you for the breakdown.
All right, so this is the finale of the first main story in The Sandman. It ends preludes in nocturnes, and what we end up getting is it's a battle between the Sandman, Morpheus, and Dr. Destiny, John D. But it is not your typical battle that you might see in a standard comic book. There are no punches thrown, there are no guns shot, and all swords, from what we can see, remained sheathed. Instead, a lot like when Dream went to hell, we get a battle of wits, and we will see who comes out in the end as Morpheus and Dream go into the dreaming and spend their time going back and forth with each other, essentially trying to trick the other, is the way that I saw it, into losing. And so Dream starts off first by giving D nightmares and causing him to feel shame. And then eventually D realizes what's going on and manages to take back over, to be back in control and search out Dream as Dream runs to the dreaming and hides. And then D starts to break down the dreaming. And that is what really causes Morpheus to finally come in and say, you cannot do this anymore. We get flashes of other inhabitants of the dreaming. We get flashes of Destiny. And it's one of my all-time favorite pieces when he says he is hesitant to turn to the next page in the book, We also see D is deconstructing and is now a skull is all that remains of him in the dreaming. And eventually D crushes the dream ruby, and in doing so thinks that he has beat Dream, but in fact he has released all that power back to Morpheus. Morpheus is able to right some of the wrongs that John D has done and sends him back into Arkham Asylum as silence washes like a river over Arkham. No sounds of screaming or sobbing, no noises of pain or madness, just peace. The only noise is the gentle, even cadence of people asleep, in, out, in, out. Listen, you can hear it.
I love that part. It's nice narration.
And I think we're going to go take a little nap because that sounds nice, and we'll be right back.
Do you fondly remember blowing the dust out of a golden Nintendo cartridge to get it to work?
Get the dust out of it.
All right, here we go. Yes, let's get it.
Now the screen's gray.
Aw, man. Or those long nights when you were up late fighting Ganon and you'd hear your mom coming downstairs.
Hello? That's Mom. Pretend you're asleep.
Wait, pause it, turn off the TV.
Do you think she's gone?
Make a sound.
I thought I heard two boys down here. Oh well.
Well, Ben and Pat are here to transport you back to those exhilarating moments as the Hyrule Podcasters! Join the two brothers each week as they play through Zelda games in Nintendo's legendary series. Episodes are filled with color commentary, lightly researched facts, personal anecdotes, and more. Hyrule Podcasters is available through Anchor on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow the Hyrule Podcasters on Facebook and Instagram at Hyrule Podcasters and on Twitter at Hyrule Podcaster.
All right, so we're back here. We're in the deep dive. Sean and Ashley were just really excited to get into the meat and potatoes of all this. So let's set up what we have going on here. And I think it plays really nicely to say, repent! The end is near. Ashley, where are you going with this?
I really enjoyed that intro. I appreciate it. This is what my whole life has been building up to. So in wanting to prep for this episode, initially I thought I wouldn't have a lot to pull from for this issue just because it feels like a pretty, I don't want to say cut and dry, that feels derivative, but generally there are certain things that happen. We can follow them in succession. There's a beginning, middle, and an end, and there's not a lot in between. But the longer I sat with the issue, the more I was starting to pull from. And the first thing that I wanted to talk about, you really find on that, I think it would be like the second page of this issue when you're having all these horrific events described to you, but specifically the panel where it says, bereft of the rapture, they weep for their abandonment by a suddenly distant God. And I wanted to talk about that because I think the casual reader will go, oh yeah, crazy fundamentalist Christians, totally normal. We see street preachers all the time, but you might not necessarily know what they're referring to in that section and how it kind of plays out throughout the rest of the issue. And so I thought that maybe some background in the theology that's being demonstrated here might be a little helpful and just enrich the reading experience. So whether you grew up reading and or watching the Left Behind series or not, you may have been exposed to some sort of concepts of the rapture. Were you guys ever exposed to the idea of the rapture? Or were you spared
I remember
that
it
trauma
from those novels that were big when we were all probably teenagers. That's what I remember for the most part.
Is that the Kirk Cameron?
Yeah.
Is he in that?
Yeah, so the Left Behind novels were written by Tim LaHaye and Jerry B. Jenkins. It was a big series. They kept coming out with all these books. They had basically the black cover with the colorful stripe down the center with really epic titles. My mom had all of them. And like she was just curious. It wasn't even like she was diehard. She never was particularly fundamentalist. It was just like this is neat. I liked Stephen King. I bet I'll like this. And so then even as kids, I got a few of the teen ones, Left Behind for Teens. And they were frankly very boring and poorly written, so I never finished them. But it was this big epic sort of journey of these people that were quote unquote left behind after the rapture. The rapture being this belief that Christians will be basically transported or zipped up into heaven at the second coming of Christ. And that is a very specific theological take that not everybody unpacks, because it's just, through popular media, through popular Christian media, is sort of given to them, and people run with it and go, yeah, that's how it works. But I think it is really critical to sort of unpack our eschatology when we are dealing with concepts like the apocalypse. And I'm going to unpack these terms specifically so you kind of can follow me, because there have been a lot of eschatological theories to run through the course of Christian history, and we see one such theory expressed here with these fundamentalist street preachers. So eschatology, I've mentioned it before, but just again, briefly, it's the theological study of end things or the end of time. So anytime you're in a religion where you're talking about the end times, you're trying to theorize about how this will happen or what will bring it about, you're doing eschatology. The apocalypse, specifically in Christian theology, focuses, it could be any one of three things when you're saying apocalypse. You could be talking about the end of the world. You could be talking about a type of literature focused on the unveiling of divine mysteries. Or you could be talking about a specific book written in apocalyptic form, such as the book of Revelation, which is the only apocalyptic book in the Bible. And there are lots of different interpretations on the book of Revelation. A lot of people like to, because it's a fun book to read, because it's nuts. There are so many.
It is nuts.
I think it was the first one I read, yeah.
Was it really?
I think every teenager, I feel like, flips to Revelations, right?
Yeah.
That was my take. We all flipped to Revelations.
That's hilarious.
Horrors of
cool
Babylon,
monsters and stuff.
serpents coming out of the sea, epic stuff.
Absolutely. It's a huge mythic tale. There's a lot of stuff to unpack in it. It's just funny to me that would be the one that you guys first read, because what more confusing book to flip to than Revelation? But I mean, to be fair,
I also liked nu metal at the time, so
fair enough. That's very fitting.
My choices
this
were,
explains a lot.
Yes.
This explains a lot. But through the course of history, there have been so many interpretations of Revelation, because everyone wants to unpack it. They want to understand the quote-unquote mysteries of Revelation. As far as authorship is concerned, we really only know that it was written by a John, whether that's the disciple John or that's who we refer to as John of Patmos. They're frequently linked together, John the Apostle and John of Patmos. We just know he was on Patmos when he was writing it. He was exiled. But specifically, there are some interpretations of Revelation that sort of seep into modern culture. And I just want to go through 4 of them briefly, so you can kind of have an idea as to why people think the way they do. So there is premillennialism, which is this idea, is a millennialist belief. And I don't mean millennial like I'm a millennial via my age. I mean, it's this interpretation of Revelation 20, where there's a reference to 1,000-year period of peace. So when I say a millennial, I'm talking about that 1,000-year period and people's interpretation as to when that fits into history. So millennialist theories tend to be focused on timing and figuring out when things will land to signal the apocalypse, ultimately. So premillennialism is the belief that Christ will return before the millennium, or that 1,000 years of peace described in Revelation 20 verses 4-6, I think, is specific, and then continues on into an eternal state in which the new heavens and the new earth are mentioned in chapter 21, that will come about. So you have history, you have this 1,000 years of peace where Christ reigns, and then you go on into heaven. Then you've got the post-millennialist belief, which is that Christ will return after that period of peace, that 1,000 years. And then within that 1,000 years, it's really imagining that Christian ethics will prosper. So not so much that Christ is there, but that Christianity prospers, Christian ethics prosper, a majority of humanity will become Christian, and then and only then will Christ come, and there will be this second coming and general resurrection, et cetera, final judgment. Amillennialism is the belief that the reign of Christ is more symbolic and that it'll be manifested in the hearts of those who are faithful. So instead of there will be a reign of Christianity or the reign of Christianity will happen once Christ comes back, it's more like, it's symbolic. We don't really, there are a lot of different numerological ways to interpret that 1,000 years. It's squishy. But still kind of
like good people ruling and doing good things could count.
Kind of, yeah. And
cool.
so
good
it's
luck.
a lot of mainline Christianity kind of falls in that amillennialist sort of tradition. And then you get into dispensationalism.
I'm a millennial.
You'll get into dispensationalism, which is the belief that biblical and human history consists of dispensations or eras that break down and were divinely appointed, almost like trials of some kind. And so most American dispensationalists will follow what's called the Schofield sevenfold scheme. It's a mouthful. Schofield sevenfold scheme. And so these seven folds of these dispensations, these seven dispensations are the innocency, so before the fall, so before the garden was defiled by sin. Conscience, so the fall to the flood. Human government. Promise, so Abraham to Moses, roughly. The law, so Moses to Christ, so that's when we get all those laws.
Deuteronomy, all that good stuff.
Exactly. Grace, so what they call the church age, hilarious and a little ironic. And then the kingdom, which is then that 1,000 years of peace. And there are diagrams of this. So dispensationalism can get a little intense. I have some opinions about it that I'll try to be gentle with. But there are diagrams sort of like showing you where all of these eras or dispensations lay out. And then frequently what people will try to do is try to predict when that era of the kingdom will land. So that's when you get a lot of people sort of looking towards modern history or current events to try to pick out, oh, that's a sign of the apocalypse. So we've brought up the Left Behind series. One of the big bads in the Left Behind series is the character
Spoilers.
Nikolai Carpathia, who is the supreme potentate of the global community, which is this idea of this global community and global religion that all like ultimately follows him into everything. He's really just like a function of Satan, but they're all following him. And so when people read that, they started to assume that the EU was a reflection of this global community and assuming it was a sign of the apocalypse and also the sign of Satan coming back to rule.
There you go.
It was a whole thing. Big thing. I remember it was I think it was like in 7th grade when this was coming out the most and people were trying to guess at this. So it can get really bizarre very quickly. Now, that's like at the extreme end. There are some historical and valid sort of ways you could apply this and interpret this that don't go that route. But that's what we see most frequently, and that's what we see depicted here in the comic, is this premillennialist, dispensationalist sort of focus on scripture and on Revelation specifically, because they're talking about that this rapture has happened. They believe this rapture has happened, and they've been left behind to then have to deal with torture, torment, and a world without God, ultimately.
And so what Ashley is referencing for those of you at home, to just right on page 2. So page 1 starts the comic. Page 2 is the next page after that. And it's on the left-hand side, and you see the repent the end is near sign, and bereft of the rapture, they weep for their abandonment by a suddenly distant God.
Yeah. And so, you know, a lot of the craziest of the crazy tend to, I said I was going to be gentle with my opinions, and then I just decided, no, screw that. Tend to run this risk of going into, I can predict the future. I can predict when Christ will return. I can predict who Satan is, or I can predict who the second Adam is, which is a whole sort of trying to take prophecies that were not written for us, were not meant for us, and running with them in a way that does not apply. And that's where I think you get into preterism, which is more the idea that you could be a partial preterist or a full preterist in the sense that biblical prophecies, have they occurred already? Do we have historical takes for them? A partial preterist would probably say that Babylon the Great, which is referenced in Revelation, was really demonstrated in the Roman Empire, and the beast is actually a reference to Emperor Nero because, again, he persecuted a lot of Jews. So there is a lot of okay, how could we apply a historist view to this? What has happened throughout history, and especially at that time, that might have been illustrated in those prophecies. And then also how does that play out in a faith now that is still looking forward? And that's where you get into a lot of current language with regard to eschatology that refers to the already not yet. You'll hear that a lot in especially contemporary theology, where there's a coming of Christ in the sense that Christ's mission has been fulfilled in the church, but also there's an awaiting of his return, etc. What I really, because I'm sure I'll get questions maybe potentially in our Discord, what most Christians that I tend to be in fellowship with really focus on is the fact that we're not meant to know. There are a lot of other references in Scripture specifically that focus on, hey, now, brothers and sisters, about the dates and times we do not need to know. We don't need to write about those to you. Those kind of comments, it'll come in as a thief in the night. It is not for you to know the times and dates the Father has set by his own authority. So a lot of us will just generally go, oh, we don't know, and it's not our job. It's above our pay grade.
That makes me feel more comfortable. That approach, I think.
One of the most interesting things I think of doing this podcast with you now for a few months, Ashley, is I was really into church for 24 years, and I don't know 98% of the things that you ever talk about. And it's just it's amazing how you can be active in church, and then there's this whole other piece of every religion, right? I mean, that's the whole point. I mean, every religion has there's an entire other thing going on, right? The scholarly, academic, look into it all, and it's always fascinating. It's always so fascinating.
I'm glad it's fascinating because it's not always fascinating to everybody, and I can understand where especially if you are no longer a part of any sort of faith community, as soon as you start to hear language like what I've just used, it'd be like, no, I've been there, I've done that. That's exhausting. Everyone that gets into that is nuts. And I've also experienced those people for sure. But I think it's an issue of formation as well, because a lot of people who lead churches in some capacity have finite resources a lot of the time. So then trying to do any sort of solid or good formation work as far as educating their communities well can be really tricky to manage.
So Sean, Ashley gave us a nice deep dive into the good book, but you have here that you want to talk about some other good books written by Shakespeare.
Yes.
Was that a transition? That was a transition.
Holy text. Yeah. Yeah. So let's start off go ahead.
I was going to say, as you jump into this is definitely one of the issues. A lot like when we initially started, I talked to y'all about the Midsummer Dream issue that's later on that I just kind of skipped over. And then Sean was like, well, that's the one that won the Hugo. And I was like, shows you what I know. This is another one of those where even as a learned adult, I go through most of this comic and I'm just I'm sure there are so many allusions in this that I just have no idea what's going on. And just Ashley was able, out of one panel, was able to give us 7 minutes, eloquently put on the end is nigh, right? It's just, I just know you're going to be oh, Ben, on this panel, there was this thing. And it was incredible that they did all this. And I was I didn't even know. I thought it was just some funny looking people talking about Caesar. I don't know what's going on. So let us know what was going on.
Yeah. So there is the, there is the Julius Caesar portion later on, but I really wanted to focus on the title here, Sound and Fury, right? And that's because it's a reference, I imagine, that our buddy Neil was pretty pleased with himself to use, right? The phrase itself, which also inspired the title of William Faulkner's novel, The Sound and the Fury, comes originally from Shakespeare in Act 5, Scene 5 of Macbeth.
I've seen and read
Tragedy
that
of Macbeth.
Thank God.
Have you?
I have, yeah.
Did you see the recent one with like Denzel Washington?
Yes, it's so good.
It was so good.
I've only watched part of it so far,
God.
but like I saw that part where he runs into the witches, and that was such a cool way of doing that. Like that.
Yes.
I mean, love for Sandman and all, but their fates knock Sandman's out of the water.
It's
not
true.
fair to compare. It's a different medium. It's Joel Cohen, right? But that was such an incredible scene. Those of you who love the Hecate, go and check out that on Apple Plus, I think. But yeah, so it came from Act 5, Scene 5 of Macbeth. In the play, Macbeth has used treachery and murder to become King of Scotland, but at this point, all of his achievements are crumbling around him, right? His enemies have joined forces and raised an army to lay siege to his castle. His wife, Lady... I'm censoring that for Ashley.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Driven mad by guilt, has taken her own life. And upon finding out, Macbeth says, he's got a little soliloquy, he says, "Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle, life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing." And it's really one of the most beautiful and terrifying soliloquies in all of Shakespeare. It's a man whose whole being is focused on his ambition and will to dominate, seeing now the ultimate futility of that in the face of death. Right? Macbeth here considers the vastness of time, of eternity, and the tiny bit of illumination we have in this vast, unknowable darkness that's as brief and flickering as a candle. Yet we pretend to all these big, meaningful dramas that make up our lives, right? That are really nothing in the face of, all of those tomorrows to the last syllable of recorded time. A wonderful reference and a wonderful speech. And, of course, then, the themes of Macbeth's speech and the play as a whole really kind of dovetail nicely with John Dee's story in The Sandman. So here's Dee's ambition to become, well, not just King of Scotland, right, but of the whole world at first. And eventually just to, burn it all down and dance in the ashes. He follows what he believes to be his destiny, this special purpose given to him by his mother and reinforced in that prophecy he heard in the diner. And it's worth noting, like I mentioned earlier, that the events of Macbeth are kicked off by a prophecy from 3 witches that Macbeth runs into on the way home from a battle, and they prophesy that, he will be king, right? And so, like Macbeth, Dee murders his way to the top and seems to have the world in the palm of his hand. But also, like Macbeth, his avarice and paranoia eventually lead to his downfall. His obsession with destroying his enemy and his overconfidence lead him to crush Dream's ruby, release all that power inside. And while Macbeth rushes off into battle, believing... part of this prophecy is that no man born of woman can slay him. The guy who eventually kills him was a cesarean birth, so that was kind of the workaround. He wasn't actually born of woman. Eventually,
woman wasn't
like that,
needed to make that baby happen. There was no woman involved.
Yeah,
No.
yeah. I feel like that's a little bit of a cheat. It's sort of a Shakespeare sneak in a way, but we'll take it.
Shakespeare
We'll take
catching
it.
strays today.
So, and like Macbeth, Dee then sees how sort of small and petty his ambitions have been, right? How full of sound and fury as he sits in the palm of Dream's hand, you know. Or maybe he sees it a little earlier than that, because there's that beautiful, striking splash page after he crushes the ruby, where it's just the tiny figure of Dee, and, you know, considering his victory in this blank, white, endless space. And he says, you know, I thought somebody would say something. Such a great moment.
I love how even at what he thinks is the height of his powers, he just wants his mom to like recognize that he was a good boy. Like that's what it is. That's what it is in that moment.
For sure. So, you know, the title works on the level of something that sounds really cool, and it's an appropriate bit of dialogue in the story when Dee is kind of like lost in dreams. But it also works in this larger and more thematic way that a little understanding of the context of this illusion, the Shakespeare's Macbeth, really illuminates.
Yeah, I think that it is another example of something that I've said multiple times, is that real people like came up with these ideas to write them and brought in their own influences into this. And it's important to remember that they're, you know, especially in something like a comic versus maybe like a novel where, you know, all you have are the words on the page, and maybe you could get a little creative with how you arrange the words sometimes. But here, being a visual medium, you can just do so much, and kind of how you position that can help people draw those illusions even more sharply sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So speaking of drawing sharp illusions, Death Takes a Holiday, Ashley?
Yes.
I see you italicize this in the notes, which, if my recollection is correct, that means it's the title of something?
It is. Briefly, before I get into this reference that I'm really actually very excited about, just to sort of combine, so our powers combined, mine and Sean, with what he said about Macbeth and then what I've mentioned about eschatology, because you brought up that that page where he's just kind of standing in blank white space, and then he's talking about how it's not how he imagined it would be. Again, how like the futile attempts to try to predict when the apocalypse is going to happen, whether from a biblical perspective or if you're trying to wrest power from somebody. And it also, back to something that I've mentioned on the podcast before, that splash page of him just in blank white space really demonstrates well that idea of eukontic and meontic nothingness, eukontic being this nothingness that he thought he managed to bring about himself, only to realize it is a physical blank page that has the potential for something, making it meontic nothingness. And we then see that with Sandman holding him in the palm of his hand and him being able to bring about life from that nothing he thought he'd brought about himself. So I just love that it comes full circle.
Yeah.
But yes, bringing up Death Takes a Holiday. So really, my two deep dives were specifically about panels of references that had come up. Because then you're going to have to help me with page numbers.
I got you.
When they're still in the diner and when John Dee is describing what he wants to do, and you see that little picture of him literally dancing above a cemetery, and he's singing Death Takes a Holiday.
Oh, yes. That would be page number 4.
Naturally, I had to look that up to see if it was a reference to something, because it also sounded very familiar. And it is. It's a film that was made in the 30s, and it's based off of an Italian play called La Morte in Vacanza. It's from 1924. It's by Alberto Casella, and again then was adapted in English for Broadway in 1929, and then again later made into a film. And the film is about the anthropomorphic personification of death. And he in this case, is contemplating why everybody fears him and why he can't hold anything that bears life, why he can't experience everything that everyone's referring to, and why he always has to be present for like people's worst moments. So he decides then to take on a human form, a mortal form, as a character named Prince Sirki, and then he spends 3 days among these very rich, very posh mortals in the 1930s, and I think Italy, and they do things like they do yacht races, and he goes to the horse races, and they have a big soiree where he dances with beautiful women, and he's like trying to understand the concept of love. So there are 3 women that he sort of like casually woos while he's with these mortals, and has these discussions about what love is, because he doesn't understand the concept of love, and what kind of relationship he could possibly have with them. And then ultimately meets Grazia, who you find out towards the end of the film has seen him as he is, as this personification of death this whole time. She hasn't seen him as a mortal man. She's seen him as this dark cloaked figure. And she's the only one that's seen him as he truly is. And despite the protestations of her family and her fiance, leaves with death, because that is the only way she feels like she could achieve happiness. And it's a really delightful film with some actors that were huge at the time. Friedrich March plays Death. He was a huge celebrated actor in the 1930s and 40s. He's from Racine, Wisconsin. Shout out.
Whoa,
and
nice.
I know. And he was in a lot of like mythic or fantasy sorts of films for that time. He played both Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in that era as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. You've got Evelyn Venable as Grazia, and she was most known for that role as Grazia, but she was also the model and voice for the Blue Fairy in the animated Pinocchio. So if you compare the photo to the image, they look oddly identical. You've got Henry Travers as Baron Caesra, who is the person who makes the deal with death to host him and not tell anybody who he is. Henry Travers is best known for his role as Clarence Oddbody in It's a Wonderful Life. So you'll definitely recognize him when you see him. And then you've got Kent Taylor as Corrado, who was only known for his Beam film work, and he was in things like Brain of Blood, Brides of Blood, Blood of Ghastly Horror. So lots of titles.
I'm detecting a theme.
He was a vampire.
There's a theme.
He was a vampire. Obviously.
Yes, probably.
Solved it.
Who's to say?
Thank you.
I mean, we can't know.
We can't know.
But I love the fact that this reference is being made in this comic, because this was also then later made into a musical. So this image of John Dee dancing above a cemetery, singing Death Takes a Holiday, went based off of this film that is about an anthropomorphic personification trying to wrestle with their role in the world. And even the role of death in the film actually sort of reflects Morpheus's journey much better than like the death we receive in this comic scope. So when you watch the film, and I really do strongly, it's only like an hour long, it's very short, but it's very cute, very charming. You will see like, oh, this is just Morpheus doing his sulky thing the entire time, wooing women and trying to figure out what he's supposed to do and how to be loved best. And it, then comparing it with John Dee and seeing him again trying to express what he thinks ultimate happiness would be like, but having absolutely no scope for what would satisfy him, I think pairs really well with this film. So if you want to have another enriched experience, watch the movie, then read this comic, and you'll have a new appreciation.
I'm sold. I want to check it out now.
I know one of the things that I really enjoyed, looking at this comic is a lot of the panel work, I guess is the only, or maybe page work might be the better way to put it. So in particular, when Dr. Destiny starts jumping into the dream world and starts to move through that. So for those of you with your comic books at home, that starts on page number 9, where we get some standard kind of panel structures. Then, we see it really changes a lot as Dee is looking for it. And one of the things that, I noticed here, and Sean, I thought maybe you could jump in, is that Dr. Destiny seems to evolve substantially over the course of this comic.
Yeah, old Dr. Destiny. This was an issue that was very centered around him, right? And more so than 24 Hours or Passengers, really. So in approaching this issue, I kind of wanted to go back and explore the history of Dr. Destiny and see kind of where these different visual portrayals of him came from and how his character might have developed and been changed over the decades, really. And so I kind of went back and I read through the majority of his early appearances in Justice League comic books from the early 60s to the late 70s. And it was really interesting to see. It's a very different tone that a 1960s Justice League of America book has than the Sandman in 1989. So Dr. Destiny, never given a name until Neil Gaiman gave him a name. So
no way.
So for the 20 years, almost 30 years before he appeared in Sandman, he was just Dr. Destiny.
I like it how Neil Gaiman's I will use my entire brain to give you the most amazing name. John? Wait. D. Yes.
Yeah.
That is the name you are given now.
And yes, he was created by Gardner Fox and Mike Sekowsky. First appeared in Justice League issue 5 from 1961. It's so goofy. Okay, so at this point, he is not he's not an established criminal. He decides to become a thief. But before committing any crimes, he figures, I'll get the Justice League out of the way first, and then I'll go commit my crimes. Yeah. So he invents these weird, anti-gravity discs, nothing to do with dreams or anything at this point. He's just, standard, looks like a dude, just like a guy who's, was on the bus with you or driving in the car behind you.
Wait, I'm sorry, pause. He can create anti-gravity discs, but instead decides to turn to a life of petty crime.
Yes, he invents anti-gravity discs, he invents shrinking rays, he invents dream machines. Ashley, he sneaks out of jail by tying a matchbox to a child's balloon and then shrinking down himself and his criminal friends.
No.
Climbing in the matchbox and floating over the prison walls.
This is not real. This can't be real.
See, this is what you run into. This is what you run into in late stage capitalism. Even the most intelligent people have to turn to a life of crime because they can't make any money because they got to make the money. They got to get that money.
Dude could have a Nobel Peace Prize and he's just gonna rob a bank.
Nope, Nobel Peace Prize don't pay the bills, hun.
Yeah, these are conditions of alienated labor. This is what this produces. This is what this produces.
Join our Marxist revolution.
Yeah, so the anti-gravity thing leads him to impersonate one of the members of the Justice League. He gets caught. He goes to jail, and then every subsequent issue appearance is him plotting from jail. He's just in jail from 1961 to 1989. And it's always with some wacky crimes. My favorite issue that I read was issue 19 from 1963. This one was genuinely very cool. Still in a very Silver Age style, so if you're not used to reading comics from the American comics, from superhero comics from the 1960s, it might be a little jarring, but it's a really imaginative, fun issue. Destiny, in that issue, invents the Materiopticon, which is a machine that he uses to induce the Justice League to dream about themselves. Listen to this plot. Okay, let me see if this makes sense. So he builds a machine that makes the Justice League have dreams of themselves with enhanced superpowers. And then he uses the machine to make those dreams real. So now there's like Justice League doppelgangers out there that are evil. And I believe he says something like, they're wicked because, of course, I am wicked, or something like that.
Classic.
So he's got the wicked Justice League, and the more evil they act, the more powerful they get. So there's all these cool scenes of them just like mopping the floor with the regular Justice League in really clever ways. Like the two Green Lanterns have this, because it's, for the Green Lantern, it's willpower that powers his magical ring, right? So you have these two Green Lanterns who are both engaged in this battle of wills to see who controls the Green Lantern ring. And then you have a fake Superman that takes out the real Superman by casting a magic spell, because Superman's other weakness, besides kryptonite, is his susceptibility to magic.
Is that canonical?
And yeah, that is canonical. That's
cool.
still utilized to this day.
Oh, cool.
Huh.
Yeah. So it beats up the Justice League. They get shot into space, right? And
Where else? Nowhere to go but up.
yeah, they escape and they sneak back to Earth with using their secret identities. So this is also the first time they're all revealing their secret identities to each other.
Oh no.
Yeah. So then they get caught again, and they get rocketed down to the center of the Earth. He figures, that way didn't work. I'll try the other way. They escape that, and then they win because the Atom, Ray Palmer, the Atom, who can shrink down really tiny, he basically, lobotomizes the fake Justice League and sends everyone to prison. So he, shrinks down, sneaks in their heads, gives them a little, sort of just, plays bongos on their brains, and then that takes them out.
There was a really great Calvin and Hobbes comic strip. It was a few long, where Calvin makes a good version of himself instead of the ornery bad version of Calvin. And the way that the good Calvin ends up because the good Calvin does all the chores, does all the homework, does all the things. That way regular Calvin can just hang out with Hobbes and do whatever. And how the good Calvin ends up being defeated in the end is he has a bad thought. And so that was antithetical to his entire existence. So he pops out of existence when he has a bad thought. And I thought maybe that's how that was going to wrap up, is that they convince them to do something nice, and that causes them to have a brain aneurysm.
They got to put out an issue every month. I'm sure if they had a little more time to think about it, they would have come up with that. But those pages aren't going to draw themselves. If you ever want to do a Calvin and Hobbes podcast, just let me know. I'm in for that.
Noted.
But
noted.
So throughout all these early appearances, he's literally just a dude, just a kind of middle-aged guy. It's sort of a dad bod. It's actually not until issue 154 in 1978 that he shows up in costume. Skull-faced because at some point, because he started working in dreams, the prison psychiatrist takes away his ability to dream, and that causes his desiccated appearance. But this doesn't appear until 1978. So then he's got hood and cloak, like you see in the comic, where during that period where he's sort of skull-faced, he's got that cloak and hood. So that's from that 1978 appearance. And that is also the first appearance with the Ruby and a new version of the Materiopticon. In that one, he gives the Justice League a bunch of weird dreams again, but then he brings those dreams to life again. But these are all things he doesn't create Justice League doubles. He just messes with the Justice League's powers in weird ways, and it's actually pretty fun how far out they get. Batman grows real wings, and so he's flying around fighting crime with real wings.
Amazing.
I hate that.
Yeah, no, it's pretty cool looking. And then the Flash, he can't stop slipping. And he eventually slides off the face of the Earth and just goes off into space. And so he needs to slingshot around Jupiter to get back. Superman gets like stuck in super ice and he has to fly into the sun to melt it. And then it ends with Destiny making a bunch of giant copies of himself and just beating the Justice League to death. Of course, this was all a dream that Destiny had because, again, the Atom and Black Canary get a hold of his Materiopticon and they give him this dream that he's won. 1980, he finally hatches a plan to drive the world mad with nightmares. So we're going from simple thief, regular-looking dude, to skull-faced guy whose goal is to drive the world mad with nightmares. And it's really not that different of a characterization than we get in Neil Gaiman's comic 9 years later. Gaiman added the element where all along it's been this ruby dreamstone that's powered his machines, and of course he gave him that name. But if you followed these stories through the decades, it's a much more natural evolution than I expected it to be. I always assumed that Neil Gaiman was plucking this obscure Silver Age character out and just giving him an entirely new personality and history and background and all this. It's actually fairly consistent. I was surprised to see that. So I hope this little journey through the history of Dr. Destiny has been a pleasant one for you all.
And then I think one of the things that, or one of the people that were really important to this issue would be Dringenberg, right, Sean?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, this is just such great work from Mike Dringenberg. I wanted to take this time to kind of dig in a little bit on who he is as a guy, because he's not. Yeah.
Are you gonna make another fan club? Because the Sam Keith fan club, I noticed you kind of, are you leaving him behind?
Well,
you're over to Mike now. Another Sean Sneak. You Sean sneaking out on Sam Keith?
No, mad love for Sam Keith, and Dringenberg thinks of Sam Keith and Neil Gaiman as like his older brothers. That
makes you feel better at night. Okay.
And remember, they got their start together. Dringenberg ended up at the Sandman because he worked with Sam Keith on radioactive adolescent hamsters. That's how they met. That's how Dringenberg got brought in. But, one of the things that was surprising to me, because this is such a landmark work, it's pretty easy to find people who are speaking about it, people who are reminiscing about it, the creators on talking about the importance of the series. Not so with Mikey D. I could actually only find one single interview with him in the searching that I did, which is surprising because he worked in one capacity or another, either as the penciler or the inker, on 13 of the first 16 issues of the series. Like, he's, I saw one blog call him the closest thing to a regular artist Sandman had. And of course, he designed the look of 5 out of 7 of the Endless. And we'll talk more about his character design work, like, next issue, I would imagine, because it becomes very important. But here I just want to talk about a little the significant change in the tone and style of his art, compared to Sam Keith. Dringenberg's art's much more, sort of subdued and much more realistic, while at the same time almost being more theatrical in a way than Sam Keith's sort of bulbous, cartoonish forms. And I don't mean that, Ben, as a criticism of Sam Keith, or to imply that...
I wasn't thinking that. Maybe subconsciously you know what you're doing.
I don't know. I feel like Sean's a little bit like the Taylor Swift of the comic book world.
Oh! Like, new guy every week? Is that what you're referring to?
Oh, is that where we're going? Okay, I don't know that much about Taylor Swift.
Oh, my apologies.
I was like, because if you all could see me right now, I am not someone who would be confused with Taylor Swift.
Slight resemblance.
I just mean that, it's very different, and that affects what we take from the story. Dringenberg, like I said, thinks of them. Sam Keith is an older brother. He said it was a pleasure inking Sam Keith in this interview I saw. And then he kind of paused and went back and he said, actually, it was awful, but a little bit of gossip for you. It was awful because of the way the editors treated Sam Keith.
Well, you've mentioned this before.
Yeah, we've heard that before. Yeah.
But that was all from Sam Keith's perspective, right?
Right,
sure.
right.
Like Neil Gaiman has said that, Sam felt uncomfortable. He felt it wasn't right for him and he quit, and that was sensible. I think Karen Berger has made, similar comments. Keith has been more open about it, but this is the first time I've seen like someone outside of that group of people directly involved, like say that, yeah, it was pretty messed up with what happened. He says, especially with issue 3. So that was the Dream a Little Dream of Me issue. And I think, you can see maybe some straining in Sam Keith's work there, but he says that it was just awful the way he was treated, and that some of the things that were said to to Sam Keith, Mike considers like unforgivable. Interesting.
Wow.
But nevertheless, Keith conveyed the sense of like dreamlike unreality through these fantastical forms and shapes, right? Think of the hellscape, think of the House of Secrets and Mysteries, those characters. It was just like these very fantastical renderings. But Dringenberg relies on formal contrasts in a lot of ways. So he uses collage that kind of mixes with cartooning, and you've got the cartoons and then these sort of photorealist backgrounds. So
that's one of the things I really liked reading this was seeing that almost a multimedia approach to the comic book panels.
Yeah, which is interesting because that's the approach Sam Keith wanted to take originally, and they told him no. And then Dringenberg was able to do it. Like on the page, once D has entered the dreaming, and he's got that sort of Julius Caesar look, and he's receiving, he's having his dreams interpreted by the soothsayers. You see a photo of Ethel Cripps in the background, right? Like a signed photo that that D is sort of, aghast, kind of looking at above him.
This would be page 10 for those of you that want to look at it.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking of the image 2 pages later, so that would be page 12. That really amazing image, where he's floating in right from the side there, and you've got that very realistic sort of grocery store background, and a family in there shopping with the dream masks, right? I love that so much. It's not going to be a Sean sneak. I'm mentioning it now so I don't have to mention it later. But it's just such a beautiful page. And this is really, I think it's important to pay attention to how each of these artists represent the dreaming and the state of unreality. It's a very different way than every other artist who works on this series does it, and I think it works extremely well. Dringenberg mentions using all these different tools to create this. He was a sort of formally trained artist. He credits his kind of academic background quite a bit in his success here, but he says he was using things like collage scraps, graphic crayon, even Dr. Pepper he uses at one point.
It's really cool.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know. He didn't say where he used it, but I mean, that's pretty cool.
That's all I'm going to be looking for now.
I know, right? Like, which of these images might involve Dr. Pepper?
Did you know that Dr. Pepper used to be served hot?
Yeah, I actually did know that, and I think it's horrifying.
Yeah, it was like a thing. Yeah.
Have you ever tried it?
There was also an old jingle. It was like Dr. Pepper 10, 2, and 4. And it was like you're supposed to drink a Dr. Pepper at 10, 2, and 4.
10, 2.
This is why we all have diabetes.
Absolutely.
Maybe if we get enough Patreon subs, we can do a video where we drink hot Dr. Pepper.
Yes.
Yes, it will not take me. It will not take a lot of subscribers. Like,
Wait,
I'll do it after.
No,
Like,
We have one. We have one
not
right
like
now.
that,
Let's get
Sean.
more.
Not like that. If anyone just like mails me a Dr. Pepper, I'll drink it right now.
yeah.
Do not drink any male Dr. Pepper, Sean. You're too valuable. Too valuable.
So, one other thing that surprised me about kind of learning about Dringenberg's process was how slow he works. And that also may be a product of his formal training. He says, he always wants to create that oh wow moment. So he would get rid of any pages that didn't have that factor. Like he would literally burn them. He would burn the pages
Wow.
that he was not happy with. Even, he says, if he'd already worked on it for 3 days. Now, for those of you who are, not aware of how comic book artists work generally, like the sort of industry standard, especially at this time, was that artists on a monthly series should shoot to have one completed page per day. 1 page per day. And that's tough as it is. So working on a page for 3 days and then starting over from scratch is absolutely insane. And he says this is where Kierenberger would freak out at him because the book would already be a week late and he'd be like just burning pages in his garage or something.
Yeah, I think as an editor, that would give me some palpitations as well.
Yeah, I'd have some frustrations.
Yeah, but overall, I mean, he seems like a really intense guy. Like, I would love to talk to him, but just, he is definitely the guy that drew 24 Hours and designed Death. Just very intense. Seems very nice, but very intense. Like, in this interview at the Cartoon Museum that was recorded and is uploaded to YouTube, he tells multiple stories throughout this interview of the friends of his that were assaulted or murdered during his time making Sandman. This is like a series of digressions that he makes during this interview, just to telling murder stories and things like that. He also talks about his disdain of, superhero books for the most part. He did like Marshall Rogers' Batman work. Marshall Rogers, artist who is really integral in the late 60s and early 70s of making Batman sort of that dark knight figure, like returning Batman to his sort of shadowy, noirish roots. So he did appreciate that. But he says he always had a distinct loathing for the meathead mentality of superhero books. He was he was inspired by the music he listened to is the music you would probably imagine he listened to. A lot of stuff I hadn't heard of, but also like a lot of industrial records, Throbbing Gristle, The Cure, Bauhaus, a lot of prog rock, stuff like that. He calls it a sort of audio Dadaism. He says he tells one story.
That's pretentious as hell, but it tracks.
It's this is really. This is this interview, yes. He tells a story of being inspired by a show in LA he went to where the band set up anvils on opposite sides of the stage. And then they would have a person hit an anvil with a mallet and the sound would reverberate back and forth through the space. And then the guy on the other side of the stage is doing the same thing, but at a completely different tempo. So these sounds would be overlapping, and then the reverberations would follow at like a totally different pace. And he says it caused the audience to become nauseous, and folks were like running outside and vomiting. And this was one of Mike Dringenberg's inspirations.
Yeah, I can imagine him just like being like, wait, hold on, and just standing in between the chaos, like in between both anvils, being like, my muse.
This is it. Yeah. So I just think it was really fun to learn a little bit more about him than I ever had before. I also learned why he gave the Sandman the hair that he did. Because you'll notice Sam Keith's Sandman hair, very different than the big sort of spiky, elaborate hair that we typically associate with Dream. He wanted it to have... he thought the big hair, the big like Robert Smith style hair, looked shamanistic or like Japanese lion dancers. You know, he wanted to have that sort of otherworldly effect.
I thought he looked a little younger in this issue than previous issues we've covered.
Well, that's one of the other things is that he's generally credited with making sexy Morpheus. Like, that's... Sam Keith's Sandman looked a little like, you know, he fit in with that sort of like comic book monster look in a way, you know? But Dringenberg's dream is like, you know, he's wearing like the t-shirt, he's all sort of lithe, and yeah. So yeah, super intense guy. Great to hear from. I wish he'd do more interviews.
Maybe we can get him on this one.
Oh my god. We'll be right back. Do you fondly remember blowing the dust out of a golden Nintendo cartridge to get it to work?
Get the dust out of it.
All right, here we go. Yes, let's get it.
Now the screen's gray.
Aw, man. Or those long nights when you were up late fighting Ganon and you'd hear your mom coming downstairs.
Hello?
That's Mom. Pretend you're asleep.
Wait, pause it. Turn off the TV.
Do you think she's gone?
Make a sound.
I thought I heard two boys down here. Oh well.
Well, Ben and Pat are here to transport you back to those exhilarating moments as the Hyrule Podcasters! Join the two brothers each week as they play through Zelda games in Nintendo's legendary series. Episodes are filled with color commentary, lightly researched facts, personal anecdotes, and more. Hyrule Podcasters is available through Anchor on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow the Hyrule Podcasters on Facebook and Instagram at Hyrule Podcasters and on Twitter at Hyrule Podcaster.
All right, so we come to everyone's favorite section, our favorite panel and favorite non-Sandman character. So we'll start with favorite panel as we always do. I think there's going to be some good competition here. I'm actually going to go first, and I am choosing pages 12 and 13, the big splash page that Sean tried to sneak me on. And I don't know if he successfully did it or not, but I'm still going to talk about it. The main thing that drew me to this was the use of multimedia, which Sean talked a whole lot about. So I won't go a whole lot more into it, but I just love that we start to get these little hidden Sandman helmets everywhere. And there's something about multimedia. My mom does a lot of collaging, and it just made me really happy kind of seeing this and seeing the approach to it. So that's going to be my favorite panel, which is actually a page, but it takes up the entire page, so it counts as one panel. That's all I'm justifying. Ashley, what you got?
Okay, I was torn by two, but I think I just made my decision. It's not particularly notable. It's right after Morpheus brings John back to Arkham, and they've been greeted by Professor Crane.
I know the one.
Yes, so they're walking down the hallway. They're in the darkness, and you've got Professor Crane, aka Scarecrow, on the left, and you've got Morpheus on the right, and then you've got John in between them, and he's saying there's no place like home, Professor Crane. And I was drawn to this panel specifically because of its reference to the Golden Age of Hollywood that we've kind of seen throughout, specifically with reference to The Wizard of Oz. And so you've got, the Scarecrow being the Scarecrow, and then you've got Morpheus, who looks a little bit like the lion in this case. And then you've got John Dee being Dorothy, which I find hysterical. Even just like the way he's dressed, it looks like, if in shadow, you could imagine him in a little Dorothy dress and pigtails. So I think it's just kind of endearing and cute considering the trauma of the last issue and a half that we've encountered. The fact that we've got John Dee in a kind of innocent phase of just both exhaustion, defeat, and sort of a contrite attitude in this point, and the way Morpheus is treating him. I just kind of like this panel sort of in what it's referencing, and also how it sort of frames John Dee as a pitiful character.
Thanks, Ashley.
Do you think, first of all, do you know I specifically did not choose this panel because I thought you might take it?
Did you really?
I really did.
There we go.
I meant to say something earlier, actually, so I could get that in beforehand. But
That's a very generous co-host move. Kudos to Sean.
But I was like, I think this is an Ashley style panel. I do got to say, I think Dream would probably have to be the Tin Man, right? Because
certainly.
That's his whole thing, is that he learns to, well, let's not get too into it. Okay.
See, that could be a whole conversation.
It's like we have a whole deep dive section in this podcast. Is Sean trying to sneak a deep dive into the wrap-up basic? I'm very confused here.
It's got energy has to go somewhere.
They sat through the ad break. They're like ready to go. All right, Sean, what's your panel?
All right, so my panel is on the page where just after John Dee has promised that he's going to kill Dream, and the page starts with Dream being like, kill me? It's the bottom of that page.
Sean just held up his iPad to the camera for those here in the studio, which is just his co-host. This is page number 6 for those of you at home.
Yeah, so it's the bottom of that page where Dream has put on his helm, and he, you see him standing there in the diner with his black coat of flames and the faces of the dreamers within it, and he's making some sort of elaborate gesture as he goes to open the portal into the dreaming. And I honestly don't even quite know why I love this one so much. It might just be like the theatricality of it. Like I was talking earlier, like there's something theatrical about Dringenberg's art, and that sort of elaborate pose as Dream goes to open this portal. It's so otherworldly, and it makes me think of like silent film, right? Like it reminds me of like a gesture from like Nosferatu or something.
Yes.
I love that so much, and that was an image that's always sort of stuck with me.
But I do find it funny that the panel following, he's just straight up stepping on a dead guy's body.
Yeah, he's just standing on his back. I thought about choosing that one maybe to communicate a sort of similar point, but I can't get over that foot placement. I really can't.
All right, Sean, we do it snake style as always. So you went last, so you go first. Who are you picking this week?
Gosh, this is a tough one, right? Like, what am I going to choose? The guy who held up, like, the severed dog's head? Like, no, there's not...
She almost did it. You almost got her. You were so close.
So close. I gotta stop drinking water at these things.
I mean, there's victims, and then there's the Sandman John Dee. There's not a lot of options here. So I think I definitely have to go with the Bride of Frankenstein, Dream Geisha type creatures.
I like it. I
just love that bit. I think it does like capture something true of dream logic, right? Where in our minds, while we're sleeping, you kind of mix up these half-remembered phrases and images and rhymes and puns. So beware the Ides of March, Shakespeare reference, becomes beware the ideas of March, becomes beware the March of Ideas, and beware the Bride of Frankenstein. Like, there's just something truly dreamlike about that segment that I enjoyed a lot.
All right, Ashley, who are you taking?
All right. This is probably being too vulnerable, but I am picking Nan Fowler because I relate to her the most. She's the ambulance dispatcher that is like just taking call after call after call in the beginning of the issue. And then at the end of the issue, she's finally napping after what sounds like a horrific day at work.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And I so resonate with that specific posture where she's just kind of clutching the mic and leaning into her own hand. I really feel for that woman.
Oh, that is a very despairing image, right? Like, that's pretty good.
Yeah, well, and I think it's just really, really compelling that we have started this issue with such horrific scenes, like truly just awful depictions of crime and violence. But then you do have her sort of trying to persevere through it all in the beginning. Like, so they show all these horrific things, and they show her at the end of that whole section of her trying to persevere and listen and dispatch. And then at the end of the issue, when things are winding down and things are becoming peaceful again, she's found her peace and rest along with everybody else. It was just like oh, okay, I can relax now.
I don't even think I ever noticed that before. I didn't even pick up on a named character being there and her reappearing. Good catch.
All right, so I am going to go. So page 15, this is when D is starting to really decimate the dreaming. We get a glimpse of Destiny, and he is at least in my comic version, he is, it is a bluish panel. He is there in the middle. It says, in the garden of forking ways, Destiny finds himself, perhaps for the first time, hesitant to turn the next page in his book. I love the character of Destiny. For those of you that are just reading along with us, we will get more Destiny later on in this. He is one of the Endless, and will play a very pivotal role throughout this overarching story. And I'm just excited that we get another one of the Endless here, or an introduction to one.
Yeah. Also, the only member of the Endless who Neil Gaiman did not create. Destiny, also a DC horror magazine host.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, he's been around for a while. And also, the Garden of Forking Ways. Have any of you ever read Borges's The Garden of Forking Paths?
No.
I have to believe that Gaiman has been influenced to some extent by Jorge Luis Borges. Everyone should read his work. He's also got a story about a library in which every possible book exists. Like, not just books that exist, but also every possible books. Ben, I might get you some Borges for Christmas.
That'd be awesome. Thanks, Sean. All right. So in this week's episode, we took a look at Repent. The end is near. What does the apocalypse mean? Ashley talked to us kind of all about the different variations on the classical approaches to the apocalypse, to the rapture, and how it has been interpreted, including the Schofield sevenfold scheme, which was the note that I wrote down because I really liked it and wanted to bring it up again. We then moved from one good book to another, and we talked about Macbeth and Shakespeare and the sound and fury, and looking at how Macbeth is used as an allusion to what Dr. Destiny and what has happened to him in this issue as he claws and scrapes his way in his ambition will be his downfall, like the flickering of a candle. We then saw more allusions as Ashley pulled out this movie, Death Takes a Holiday, which to me just read as something silly that John was saying, but really had a lot more going on there and really pulled into the comic to just provide even more robustness to what we were reading. And then lastly, Sean wove us through how Dr. Destiny evolved from what could have been a very throwaway standard character during the silver age of DC Comics. And Neil Gaiman was able to pluck him out of somewhat obscurity after a few-year hiatus. But really, the groundwork was almost fully laid for Neil to really just take him, give him a little bit of polish and a leveling up, and we got the character that we did. And then, of course, Sean wanted to talk about Mikey D and his panel approach as an artist, and the difficulties there, and his work with Sam Keith and Neil Gaiman, and kind of how the three of them produce what we're seeing here on the page.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Sandman Unlocked.
And remember, never trust the storyteller, only trust the story.
Thanks for tuning in to the Sandman Unlocked, an Odd Conduit Media production. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Sandman Unlocked. Join us on Discord as well. Thanks to our show producer, Patrick Childers, and to Lieutenant Headtrip for our theme and incidental music. If you'd like to support us directly, head over to our Patreon. You can follow Ashley on Twitter at DEEDEE_K and on Instagram and TikTok at Ashley Mowers. Find Sean on Twitter at Lon Dogson and find Headtrip everywhere at LT Headtrip. You can get all of this info and more in the show notes. Make sure to follow and subscribe and review us wherever you listen. Until next time, and remember, never trust the storyteller, only trust the story.
Odd Conduit Media.